Okay, if you did not get notes last week, we have some extra here. So I'm going to ask Carrie, she'll hand these out. Just raise your hand if you didn't get notes last week here. Got about 15 of them or so, okay? All right, while she's doing that, I'll give you just a little something here to consider. In doing this class, I don't know about Charles, but myself on some occasions, I've had a few comments about people saying something like, I don't spend a lot of time trying to understand prophecy because as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to be here for all of this, okay? I kind of understand that in part, all right? And I can identify with that in part. But there's a book I have here written by Mark Hitchcock. He's a Dallas graduate pastor, and he's written a book on answers to the most asked questions about the end times. And he starts out with this little chart, if you will, about how much of the Bible is prophecy. Total verses in the Bible, 31,124. Total number of predictions in the Old Testament, predictions or prophecies, okay, 1,239. Total number of Old Testament verses that contain those predictions, 6,641 verses out of a total of 23,210 verses in the Old Testament, which means that then 28.5% of the Old Testament is prophetic, okay? In the New Testament, number of predictions in the New Testament, 578. Number of verses that contain those predictions, 1,711 out of 7,914 verses in the New Testament. That means then that 21.5% of the New Testament is prophetic. Okay? There's a total of 737 prophetic topics contained within both testaments. And so what it all comes down to is approximately 27% of the entire Bible is prophetic. Some of that prophecy was in the past and has been fulfilled in the past. Some of it's future. We're primarily looking at future. But the point that this author is trying to make is that if more than a quarter of our Bible has something to do with prophecy, if we make a comment like, I don't really want to spend much time on that, okay? Are we saying, well, 1/4 of this I don't really care about? This is all the inspired Word of God. So there is a worth, there is value in studying this and looking at it, okay? All right, enough of my exhortation for the day, okay? So, all right, Book of Daniel, I want you to turn there. We talked about this some last week, Daniel chapter 2. So what we're really trying to focus in on with this chart in Revelation that comes out of Revelation 13 is, I've got to get this out of the way. There are two beasts, if you will, in chapter 13 of Revelation. And we want to try to have a clear understanding of what these beasts are. They're clear. First off, they're clearly symbols. They are symbolic, okay? But from that symbolism, we can learn certain things. And even within the text, there's certain explanations or interpretations offered, okay? A lot of this goes all the way back to Daniel chapter 2 and this vision that King Nebuchadnezzar has where Daniel is invited in to explain this vision to him. And the vision is of this great image that's set up, okay? And we reviewed this a little bit last week. We talked about the head of the image represented who symbolically? Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire, okay? And then following that, you have the torso, the chest, the arms. That would be the Medo-Persian Empire, okay? And then that's followed by, what's the next empire that follows then? By Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire and the breakup of that empire. And then there's a fourth empire that's mentioned. And that is, we believe that historically Rome is that. But there's an interesting aspect to this fourth empire. Not only is it greater and more powerful and more brutal, more vicious than any of the others that have preceded it, but there's an interesting focus on the feet of this empire. So in Daniel chapter 2, I'm only going to read this part to you. I'm going to start in verse 37, okay? So you, O king, talking to Nebuchadnezzar, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. After you there will arise another kingdom, inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. What's he referring to? All these. The prior empires, okay? All right. In that you saw the feet and the toes. Now we get more specific. We're not talking just about the legs here, but we're getting down to the feet and toes. And there's some debate when you look at different versions. Not all versions are going to translate this exactly the same, but I think overall the context makes it pretty clear that we're getting down to the foot level. So that in that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron. That fourth kingdom, okay, will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. In that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, okay, in the days of those kings, wait a sec. Who are we talking about now? In the days of those kings. Any thought? How many toes? If it's a literal human type figure, how many toes are there? 10, okay? Kind of interesting, you got 10 toes in this image, and when we get into Revelation chapter 13, what do we have showing up the figure 10? 10 kings, okay? So in dispensational thought, there's usually a belief that there's a correlation between those 10 kings or horns in Revelation and the 10 toes of this image, okay? Yes?
There were either 10 or 12 Caesars in the Roman Empire after Julius. So probably they're talking about the succession of emperors until Christ's kingdom was set up in those days.
Okay, some people, yes, have interpreted it that way, okay? The question is whether or not historically that all matches exactly, and we still have a problem of there's an end to that succession. So if you read on here, okay, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, okay? So all of a sudden we've jumped to where? Prophetically, okay? The return of Christ, I think, is how we tend to look at this. Okay, if you keep reading there, That kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms. All of the preceding kingdoms will be crushed. Now, if you're, say, amillennial or postmillennial, if you recall those terms, okay, you might look at this and say that the church is doing that now, okay? But in premillennial thought, the belief is that Christ himself must return in order to accomplish this destruction of all the previous kingdoms. Yeah, everybody understand what we're saying there? Okay. All right. So, inasmuch as you, if we read on here, inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true and his interpretation is trustworthy. Part of what this all comes down to is this fourth kingdom, okay? Is this fourth kingdom, is there only one part to the kingdom, so to speak? In other words, was it all fulfilled in the Roman Empire? And if it was, Rome basically, using round dates, what happened to the Roman Empire? It basically fell apart, okay? We can talk about the invasions of different groups and things like that, but militarily and even politically, it essentially fell apart. Nevertheless, when we get into Revelation, it sounds like that same fourth kingdom still plays some kind of major role in the future, right? And hence, in premillennial dispensational interpretation, there's a revived Rome. There's a revived Roman Empire. And that empire is tied more to the feet of iron and clay and the 10 kingdoms, the 10 horns that we see in Revelation 13. Now, does that help kind of pull some of that together for you? Any questions, Julie?
Well, back in 43, it says they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Who are they? What is they?
Again, I would take that as a reference back to the kings, okay? In those days, in the days of those kings, okay? But that's still an interpretive question that's in front of us, all right? So let's go, if I can. Yeah, Dave?
Well, because my interpretation says in 43, when just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay.
Okay.
And when Christ comes back, aren't they fighting amongst themselves then?
What do you mean?
Okay, when they have
Who's doing the fighting among themselves?
the 10 kings, 10
Okay, all right. Good question. And Revelation 13 and 17 are going to help us maybe clarify that.
and then they all unite together at that time to fight against God.
Okay, all right. Let's see, all right? Let's see what happens. So flip over to Revelation 13. So here John says, then the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Some versions say the dragon is standing there. Some indicate it's John standing there. Doesn't really matter. The point is that the rest of the verse, then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns, 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. Okay? Now, part of the key to understanding all of this is keeping heads, all right, heads and horns distinct. Don't confuse them. Heads and horns. Okay? So how many heads? 7. How many horns? 10. Okay? All right. The 7 heads, on the 7 heads, there are a total of 10 diadems, crowns. and on his heads were blasphemous names. This theme of blasphemy is actually going to wind up applying to both as we see this develop. Verse 2, and the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like those of a bear, his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And if we look back into Daniel, those three animals are associated with what? Anybody remember? It's associated with the first of the three kingdoms in the image. Yes. So that's another thing. That's another idea here that helps tie this back to Daniel. Okay. All right. And as we look at this, his mouth like the mouth of a lion, and the dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan gave him, singular, gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Who do you think is him? The beast. Not the Antichrist yet. Okay, you're jumping ahead of me. Okay, all right. The beast. Okay. But does the beast actually ultimately represent the Antichrist? So that's another thing we're aiming for. Okay, but I want to develop this out of the text. Okay, the beast rises out of the sea. What's your point in bringing that up?
Just because there's another beast later on.
Yes, okay. All right, yeah. One comes out of the sea, the other one comes out of the land. Okay?
Isn't the sea a symbol for humanity?
Yeah, that's the way I think most take it, and I would take it that way too.
The beast will be a human being.
Yeah, let's again, we're trying to, let's see, how do I want to phrase this?
I've never seen a person that looked like a leopard.
Yeah. This is a symbol, okay? And the question is, what is it a symbol of? Is it only, in dispensational premillennial interpretation, often this beast is immediately equated with the Antichrist, okay? I'm going to throw out a little idea for you to consider today that maybe shakes this up a little bit, okay? Right. Put you on alert. So, verse 3, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain. Okay? We're talking heads. Heads. Okay? Not horns, but heads. One of the heads as if slain. Now the question is, and here's another one where this is often taken as applied to the Antichrist. And the belief by some is that the Antichrist will literally die and be brought back to life. Not necessarily as Antichrist. This may be, some interpreters say this maybe is what propels him into this position of great power over the whole earth. That people will be amazed by this. It's an imitation of what happened to Christ. And it's an imitation intended to deceive. Okay, that's the way some interpreters, many interpreters, I think, kind of look at it that way. All right? But it's dealing with a head. Okay? So I want you to stop right there and flip over to chapter 17. Okay? Now, chapter 17 starts out talking about, well, I'll read some of it to you. Then in verse 1, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, come here, I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. Now, I'm not going to try to explain the woman, the harlot, to you today. We've got to save that for when we get to chapter 17. But I do want to talk about the beast that she sits upon. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Sounds like the same beast of chapter 13, doesn't it? No? The only thing different I see is scarlet. but it still has 7 heads, 10 horns. Huh? No, the woman is sitting on a beast with 7 heads, 10 horns. Okay? We learn one other additional thing about, I believe this is the same beast as chapter 13. All right? Why? 7 heads, 10 horns. Okay? It goes on and talks about the woman. Verse 9 here's the key. You're offered an interpretation of this beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, starting in verse 9. Here is the mind which has wisdom. In other words, if you want to be smart here, pay attention, okay? The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 7 kings, okay? In other words, the heads represent kings, all right? Is that clear? All right? And then there are 7 kings, and then we're told 5 have fallen. What does that suggest? They're off the scene. They're past. From John's perspective in time, 1st century AD, they're past. Okay? One is obviously Rome. Okay? We can pretty much pin that one down. Okay? And whoever, at the time John is writing this, it all depends on when you think he wrote this. It could have been Nero. It could have been one of the successive Caesars. One is, the other, what? Has not yet come. So future to John's time is this other king, this 7th one, right? You see that? Okay. So that's part of our basis for saying maybe Rome, as we knew it in John's time, makes a reappearance. Okay, we'll explain more about that. Okay, keep going here. And they are 7 kings, verse 10, 5 have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. Okay, so you have 7 heads that are represented by 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. The kings are mountains, are heads. Okay? The kings are mountain. How did I say that? All right. The kings are mountains, are heads. 7. Okay? 5 have passed. One is to come. Everybody with me at least on that? Okay. All right. Okay. Then the beast, which was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom. All right, remember I told you keep the heads and the horns distinct, okay? So when's the time for the horns, the 10 kings? From John's perspective, when are they going to happen? Future. They're not yet, okay? All right. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings and who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. 1 hour being just figurative speech for a short time, right? In Revelation, probably 3.5 years. Going back to that same 42-month period that keeps coming up. These have one purpose. They give their power and authority to the beast. Okay? But who was it when back in chapter 13 and in Daniel, who is it or what is it that appears as having died? A head. And a head, is what? According to chapter 17. A mountain, which is a king. Okay? So kind of the confusing thing here. Again, I don't necessarily fault anybody who says, since we see this coming down to a king, it could be the Antichrist. It could be a specific individual, okay? But here's another thought that I'll toss out to you here. What if a king has a kingdom, right? He's not a king if he doesn't have a kingdom. He has a geographic area, people that he rules over, all right? So let's ask this question here. What if, since we're looking at that image that Daniel explained, and it gets down there to the feet and the toes, it talks about it iron and clay, and they don't mix very well, and historically, it's really difficult in Bible interpretation to find an equivalent to that somewhere in our past history. Now, in order, if there is a revived type of Roman Empire, okay, what would we be looking for that might constitute that? How could we define a revived Roman Empire? Could we, on what basis could we say this is it? You got to think here. What? A pope, okay. That's one way of looking at it, okay. What's that? Worldwide, okay. But how, if there is going to be a revived Roman Empire, yeah, so we're looking for 10 kings, 10 leaders, somehow or other associated with this. Here's what I'm getting at. Well, Jake, I'll give you a chance.
Well, didn't they have some sort of like Congress, or they didn't call it that? They had a ruling body like Congress.
Who are we talking about?
The Roman Empire. Didn't they have a Senate that told them?
They had a Senate until we get into the Caesars, and then that basically all went down the drain. Ultimately, it all goes down the drain. Yes, the question is, what would make this Roman? Thank you.
Like the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was worldwide at that time.
Okay.
They understood the world.
Okay, so are you suggesting that maybe geography might have something to do with this? Yeah, okay, obvious, okay. Either geography or ethnic, or well, authority could be one. Ethnicity could be one. Yeah, if it's ethnicity, even us sitting here today could be considered part of it, okay? We don't know exactly what this clay and iron is, what it's based on. But I would favor the idea of geographic primarily, which means what? Where are we going to look for this revived Roman Empire? Europe. Okay, Julie? They talk about a what?
There's several verses in the Old Testament, I can't find them, but they talk about Assyrian. Is that Assyrian the Roman?
Oh, the nation of Assyria? The Assyrian. I don't, personally, I wouldn't see a connection there. But I would suggest this. In chapter 17, when it talks about the 5 that have passed, they're gone, okay? Let's think a little bit about Bible history here. What was the first nation to oppress the Jewish people in our biblical history? Egypt. That's one. Okay. What's the next one that oppresses the Jewish people? The Assyrians. Okay. As far as the 10 northern kingdoms. Okay. What's the next? Babylon, that's 3. What comes after that? Medes and Persians. And what comes after that? Greece. 5. Okay? 5 kings, 5 empires under them have passed. Okay? John Walvoord, who has this book and several others on Bible prophecy, all right? His suggestion is that these heads represent various stages of governmental authority. 5 of them are in the past. 1 is now, that's Rome. 1 is yet to come in the future.
That oppress Israel
Okay, yeah, and they're always,
as Rome was doing to some degree.
yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So, what if then? Most of Europe today is what, as far as government, form of government is concerned? What term would we use? Technically, they are democracies. They are democracies, okay? The era of these autocratic rulers like the Caesars, that has long been done away with in European history, okay? But what if sometime coming in the future, that form of government comes alive again in Europe? Dictator, Antichrist, one person at the head. Paul? There were attempts. Yes. Okay. Paul, you got a point?
The rise of Islam in Europe is something that's happening under the radar of a lot of people. And in the next 10 to 20 years, the birth rates of Muslims is going to outpace the birth rates of Europeans, indigenous Europeans.
Yes.
And so there could be something, and I'm not predicting or saying anything other than that, but that could lead to what you're talking about.
Yes, and I kind of agree with Paul, and I remember studying this 30 years ago and thinking this was quite a possibility, that the idea of the iron and the clay not mixing, what if that was, in a sense, Western Christianity and Islam? I don't know, but it's something to watch. Yeah, I mean, it is happening, and they don't mix, do they? Yeah, Terry?
Years ago, I read an article where the brainchild behind the forming of the European Common Market said, "We are looking for a man, not a committee. We are looking for a man who has the charisma to where the whole world will look to him for the answers to our dilemma."
Yeah.
And he said, "And when we find that man, whether he be God or devil, we will take him."
Okay. All right. So a lot of attention has, as a result of looking at things this way, okay, a lot of attention has been focused on the European Economic Union, which is still yet to reach that 10-kingdom form. So, personally, I'm not dogmatic in saying the EU is the fulfillment of this prophecy. We just got to sit and wait this out, in a sense, okay? It may be, it may not be. This could be so far out in the future that whatever the 10 kings are, we can't even imagine at this point what he's talking about. But there's a good pause.
Really does show the mentality of people. They don't care who.
Yes.
That's the point
Yeah.
I'm making.
Yeah.
People don't care.
Yeah. They don't care. As long as we got somebody who will lead us and make our lives happy, peaceful, whatever. Paul?
And all this, not all of it, but a lot of this on an individual basis rests on biblical illiteracy. If you don't understand what we're talking about this morning, you're not going to see it coming,
Right.
or even anticipate it.
Okay. Paul makes a great point that in order for this union to eventually succeed, it depends on biblical illiteracy, right? And that if we ourselves can't understand this, how much worse do you think it's going to be for those who don't even care what the Bible has to say, right? We've got to cut it off here. Still didn't get to the second beast in chapter 13. Charles, I'm going to let you have it, okay? Yes, Yes.
The introduction of the Muslim situation, where do you place China in this whole thing?
Oh, gee, let's, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, next week. Charles, you have it. Tag, you're it. All right, let's close in prayer. Father, again, we just thank you. You know, when we first look at these passages, they seem confusing. And it's easy, perhaps, to just kind of throw our arms up in confusion and walk away from this. And yet, if we really delve into this, there is clarity. And there's value in knowing what lies ahead. And as we mentioned many times before, it's good for us to know these things. And it's good for us to be motivated to tell others about what might lie ahead. We certainly don't want to see family members and those that we love find themselves in the midst of this great turmoil and this oppression and blasphemy and everything else that goes on. So we just thank you, Father, that we can have this time of study. We ask that you commit this to our minds, to our hearts, make it clear. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And I got one quick thing to add. When it talks about the beast in Revelation chapter 13, as if it had been slain, I want you to notice the wording there. We talked in the beginning of class about similes and metaphors. This is a simile. It uses the word as. It's a comparison. It's not a dogmatic statement saying that this beast has died. Okay? It's as if it had. Okay? Whether or not Satan has the power to bring somebody back to life, I think it's questionable. Okay. Yeah. Okay.